Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Minter Dial. How are you, Minter?
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
It's amazing to see you. And it's I know it's taken a while to get you on the show, but I'm really pleased you're here. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Patience is a virtue.
I know that the first time we met, actually, I remember this, I was actually on a train and I joined one of your podcast festivals from the train. And you said, "Oh, Andrew, hi, how you doing?" And then you said, "So what would you like to say to the group?" There's about 20 people in the lounge, in the podcast lounge. And then suddenly I hit a tunnel, which meant I got disconnected.
Timing is everything. Timing is everything.
Exactly. It was like, and he's gone. So I think it was with Sam Sethi. I think Sam Sethi was on that one as well.
Sure.
That was a good festival. So it's great. Good to see you. And you've got some good bins on. I've still got I'm still living in the old age of technology, where you have to have like things dangling from your ears.
I use those type as well. I just every once in a while I have this opportunity to use the hi-fi.
The hi-fi. What's the hi-fi?
High fidelity.
Oh, I see. Okay. I think you're going to do like a kind of like a rock thing then. So thank you for coming on the show. So a quick question to kick off was, what gets you up in the morning these days, Mr. Minter Dial?
What gets me up? So I'm in launch mode as far as my book is concerned.
Okay.
And I'm always there are two things I want to do every day. And one is give away good value. And the other one is meet somebody new. And so sometimes in the morning when I get up around 5:30, mm-hmm. I do my meditation, and then I sort of ponder. I have my breakfast and coffee, and I love to come up with interesting new ideas. Mm-hmm. And they sometimes layer them in. I'm not like a natural creative. I'm more of I would say layered creative. And so anyway, so I try to come up with something interesting to give away in the day, not just sort of the regular tweets or something, come up with an interesting angle on something that I haven't given up. That stimulates me. And then meeting somebody new every day. I call them the green person. And I always try to...
The green person? What, like green shoots kind of thing?
Well, yeah, there's something like it's a fresh start. I'm meeting somebody and I get to know them. And one of the things I find most energizing is having meaningful conversations. And if you can layer in some empathy and understand this new person, you get to discover a whole new world by meeting somebody new.
It's like tapping in. It's like connecting and tapping. Oh, here we go. What is that? You can't do a sneaky drink.
It's just cold water.
I hope it's cold water. If it's anything cold water, you have to tell me what's in the glass.
Yeah, I don't know if this is for public consumption or anything like that, but it might be. There's some tonic water. Anyway,
sprinkled with a little bit of gin. So come on then. Let's get it out. Let's get it out on the early on in the episode. What gin is in the glass?
Well, some might say Mumbai, but I still call it Bombay.
Oh, really? Oh, well.
Bombay gin.
Interesting. And is that your favorite?
Yes, I like the taste and I love the bottle. I find it just a delightful bottle.
It's very picturesque. Yes.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, when we get this this kind of when we can meet socially distanced and not over Zoom, I'll take you to a very nice gin bar in Great Portland Street.
Love to.
Which has got over 100 gins. And they wear the traditional kind of white jackets and the bow ties, and
yeah, I love it.
And then you can make dirty martinis and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very
well.
Very
I'm my sort of journey of life, Andrew, is that I've managed to be rather non-denominational. If I'm being served,
if you analogize to yourself to a currency, yeah, okay, go on.
So when someone says I offer you a drink, I don't then need to sort of say, well, it has to be this or it has to be that. I'm just grateful that someone wants to give me a drink, and I kind of go with that route as opposed to say, well, it has to be Tanqueray, it has to be.
I see. Oh, right. Yeah, okay. So you kind of like saying, as long as it's got some alcohol in it at some point.
And it's a good chat.
But it's 2021. We're supposed to be all teetotal now. We're supposed to be all like, doing 50 press-ups every day, or maybe 500 press-ups a day on a finger.
Fuck it. Well, I mean, this whole idea of what we've got to do, what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. I think what we're supposed to do is find out what we're made to be doing and who individually. And that's what I think we should be supposed to be doing.
Yeah, what we're on this planet for.
That's the one.
Well, that's a great way to link to something. So I suppose the question for me was I was going to ask you, I know you mentioned it, and there seems to be this thing lurking over your right shoulder. So what are your escapades at the moment? What is going on in Minter world?
So on balance, so I got this new book that came out at the beginning of the year in the rest of the world, and then you have to wait 3 more weeks for it to launch in North America. And so I'm now, as we record this, plotting away the launch in North America, which is going to happen in a few days' time. And of course, it's a rather large country.
Post the 20th, I presume.
26th of January.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a big, that's a big deal because that's sort of the biggest market, right? In terms of, but it's also a really complex market. And so I've been doing a lot of that. I have been writing. I feel very creative about this whole point in time. There's so many different things happening. And so it's stimulating my neurons no end. So I feel like I have this bottomless pit of ideas that I'd like to write about. And essentially I have something like, I think, I want to guess, 80 different drafts in my WordPress back office waiting to be finished. So I come with this idea.
80 drafts of what? Of a newsletter?
Of an idea. Yeah, no, of a blog post.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
I mean, I've been blogging since 2006 and have between my English...
That's a lot of blogs.
It's certainly a lot of posts, yeah. I'd say I have an English and a French blog, and I've probably done about 2,500 blog posts in that period. And so I have this sort of reservoir of ideas that I want to write about. And it's exciting because obviously when I'm looking at them, I look at them contextually, which ones are interesting. But I also try to think about which ones are really the more radical or changing spectrums and try to provide a different perspective, especially since there's a lot of, I would say, almost unilateral, uniform type of thinking going on in this period.
I mean, what I've noticed with your newsletters, which I obviously subscribe to, and I recommend that people do subscribe to them, because they're it's packed with information, and it makes me think. I read it and I go, I've got to look at this. The way you've laid it out, and you share things that you come across, but also you write your POV on stuff as well, which is really, really great. Really good.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I get flack as well for trying to do too much, because some people just don't. I don't have the bandwidth to do it. Oh, bloody hell! Oh, fuck! I'll deal with that one later. I get that kind of a feedback as well. So anyway, I appreciate the fact that you take the time to.
Well, you get feedback. People saying there's too much in it.
I've definitely had that. Yeah. Just making sure I don't have time.
It's nuts. That's insane.
Well, I mean, there is this school of thought, which if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. I think it was the Irish author wrote that, and so being synthetic like a Seth Godin, writing a pithy 2-liner,
right?
Which, I don't know how to. I feel like I need to qualify what's written. You can be just either bombastic or desiring to be challenging and just say something radical. But if I don't qualify it, I feel like I'm being untrue. So I feel like I need to contextualize what I say.
You can't leave it hanging out there, really, can you?
That's it.
Yeah. No. I would ignore that. So what they call ignore the haters. I mean, I continue.
I always take on board feedback. I think it's interesting to continue to evolve. whether it's in the form. So, things are being changed in terms of the readership. It's gone from being largely desktop to much more mobile. And so you need to think about where the links are, whether they're always easily findable.
Mobile friendly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying that you're doing a lot of writing, and I suppose we'll come on to your recent addition to the portfolio of great works that you've put out there in Charles Dickens kind of style.
Oh,
not that I'm going to call you Charles Dickens, but I think you know what I mean.
These were the worst of days, I think.
We're going to get all historical now. But one of the things that I noticed, because obviously there is some analogies to what I think you're further on your journey than I am. But we do have some analogous kind of experiences in our backstory. In what I found interesting reading, just reading, some of your books and reading the latest book you lead, is that there's that kind of epiphany moment, I would call it, or that kind of light bulb moment where obviously you talk about, a major, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but a major global event that happened that you were very close to, that I think from my reading or my recollection made you really think about what's it all about. Is that fair?
It is entirely. I mean, at the end of the day, so there are two points I'd like to make. First is, it feels like the more I talk about it, and I do talk about this a lot, people go, oh yeah, me too. And the me too, of course, is not the other me too hashtag. It's I also have had this epiphany. And the epiphany typically seems to, the way I connect the dots as I'm listening, it's, oh yeah, well, I had a life-changing moment as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. And it feels like, gosh, every time the people who are on the right bandwagon, as far as I would like to say it right, if it's not an ethical question, but on that other journey, they've had something monumental happen that have made them put things into perspective, think that having the third car, the second house, and the big bank account isn't the most important thing, that there are other things in life, and that's where they go. So my first injunction is, rather than wait for the frog to be in boiling water, know that the water is getting hot, and rather than have that life-changing moment, just sort of lean in on what's important for you. And the second thing that I have to say is that event, as big as it was in many people's lives, and in my life in particular, the way we get there is not necessarily overnight. Especially as you get older, you have to be practical and pragmatic. You can't just sort of say, I'm going to get up and go. Well, because you have responsibilities, you have consequences to this. And so you could be the juvenile and run out and say, I'm going to change wives, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change this, lives. But that's being irresponsible. So what happened for me is it was led. There was a sort of a spark, created the idea, and then little by little reinforced as my prism became more and more clear by other events, and it became more and more evident that I had to become more leaderly about it.
Yeah, you had to take responsibility for your own destiny. Because hats off to you. It's when we talked before about your backstory, you'll hopefully go into a little bit of detail. But it's quite funny. I didn't realize until we spoke originally about your history with L'Oreal, and like running Red Ken. Yeah, I remember when my mum used to go to the hairdresser, say, "All right, I'm having Red Ken. I'm having Red Ken." It's like owning a legendary brand. Being that kind of ambassador for it. It's fantastic. What's it's something you can. I've got some of those ones in my history as well, but but it just shows that is it when you break out from that corporate environment, and the things that you've done in the last so many years. I suppose it's an interesting question. Is are you more fulfilled and happier with the kind of the corporate achievements, or the things you've achieved since you've been out of corporate? I suppose that's an interesting question.
Right. So I am distinctly attached to the experience that I had running Redken.
Mm.
The thing that you have to understand is that was within the portfolio of L'Oréal.
Mm.
And those are two different entities. And so there was the tremendous sense of accomplishment and fulfillment at a personal level while I was working on the Redken brand. Then there's the challenge of working outside of the Redken brand within the governance and the portfolio of brands that's L'Oréal. And it's a very different experience. One is sort of a corporate world, and the other one is a very strong brand world. And one of the things I felt was important to highlight in You Lead is this notion of governance and the corporate ownership structure.
Yeah, the family versus public versus private, and the family.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And
fascinating.
To what extent you have the opportunity to be you, because it's not about this sort of idealistic thing that I'm preaching. You have to, and you can only be. Sometimes you're in situations where, and I sort of lived this at L'Oréal, it can be a career limiting move to be overly associated to one brand in a company. The way your career moves in companies is that you get promoted and you go up in the grades in a brand. And then because these brands offer this opportunity of geographical and industry and sometimes brands changes, that this is part of your growth. So if you get too tattooed with one brand, then you're not able to move into another.
This is when you talk about the brand tattoo.
Well, that's related to it. Yes, it's. I mean, that for me is this notion of are you stamped with that brand? And if you have that moniker on your forehead as you walk into any room, then any boss is going to say, "Oh, he's not. He's one of those."
Yeah,
he can only work there.
He's the Redken camp or whatever.
Yeah. Mm. So to answer your question, within the L'Oréal world, my experience on Redken was absolutely life-changing in terms of it really shifted my mindset from understanding what it is to get the numbers in to make a difference.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, the chance I've had is to work with lots of other organizations to help them understand how their widgets can make a difference as well. And it's funny how often there's a dissociation between the product and service that I'm doing and doing something bigger that's more meaningful, having an impact. And so I find that really rewarding. And by the way, I find that rewarding at the micro level when I'm hanging out with an entrepreneur, with a single consultant, the work that they're doing, because you can all find meaningfulness and purpose in our jobs. Challenge is not, we also have to bring in the bacon. And so it's just finding that pragmatic combination.
So it sounds like you found, I mean, it's a bit like my Tesco experience. I would, analogize to that when I was there. I mean, it's not obviously not similar, not completely analogous to what you're doing in Redken and L'Oréal, but it's a bit like you find a pattern of, how you learn to lead, at scale, and how you, I suppose, because you've moved from an individual contributor role into a leadership role, you're no longer viewed as a specialist. You've got to then take on a different mantle, a different position. You've got to have a different mindset. You've got to have a different way of dealing with things and dealing with people and dealing with tasks. And you can't just dive in and solve all the problems as you did before in your earlier career. So it's that kind of, that transition to that leadership role, what I found was quite an interesting journey. And I suppose it's then, what you learn from that. And then when you look at other situations with other people or other organizations, it's a bit like you have a third eye. You say, aha. I don't know if you found that as well.
Well, I can say that I was imperfect in my journey. And there's that temptation to want to see the solution and explain the solution. Therefore, let's say micromanage as a consequence, or allow people to have the agency to screw it up. and understand through the learning. Whereas the fast route maybe would have been just say, listen, just go from A to B. Let them find their route. And maybe it's not to B, but it's to C. Along the way, they might do more than what I do. But that letting go element is so difficult in a culture, which I had at L'Oréal, where you're expected to know everything down to the detail.
Okay. So macro and micro.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, that's similar to retail, is that, if you walked into the room with certain individuals from that entity that I used to work for, and you didn't know your numbers, you're in trouble.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, down deep numbers, right? It's like down to units and the cost of the product and all this stuff and profitability and what's going to happen next week. And
yeah, exactly. Interesting. So I suppose what you're saying is that and part of the thing you talk about in the book is this thing about the personal, the North Star, and your what are you here for, your why, I suppose. If you analogize to your Simon Sinek analogy, start with the why, but then it's about the alignment of your personal North Star to the company North Star, and what that means for how you lead, I suppose.
It's a very tricky thing to actually implement. What I want to get away from is this sort of dogma or idealized version of what this is, because the reality is getting your personal and professional North Stars aligned is by itself already a huge task, because it means, A, you need to know yourself. And that by itself is just a whole garden path. And then the second is to really understand who we as an organization are. And you can't just write that on an annual report and say that's who we are. It's something that has to be lived and it moves. And so you're trying to align two moving beasts. And the consequence of this, when you go deep and you do it well, is that you may end up having an enormous number of your staff saying, I'm not aligned. I need to bugger off. And so there's a challenging route to go down. And then the second challenge is sometimes, a lot of times, you find people who aren't happy to explore who they are because they have too much fear, or they're not comfortable with their shadow, the darker sides. And so it renders people very uncomfortable. So to say the least, you need to have your human resources manager deeply in the pocket, plus your legal, to understand where this can go.
You see, what I noticed is some of the things you talk about is, on that HR point, it's a bit like that thing about you re-architect. You may have issues with your team as you go through that process, and then you have to re-architect the team and re-architect the organization. I noticed there was a very, very strong message about, I don't know, if you're talking about the G and the T, the technologies. You said the end of the chief digital officer, because you should be doing digital anyway. And actually, then you talk about, how HR is such a strategic then part of the journey to I suppose you could say, reskill or retool the organizational capability, about getting the right people in who are, who've got the right mindset, got the right attitude. Choose your attitude. You've got your right attitude, and you've got the right tribe. You're building the right tribe.
In the experience I had at L'Oréal, where I got to observe how these posts were filled and who was getting what, HR was basically the bottom of the barrel. And I have no offense meant to the people in HR, but it was like I'll put you in that once you haven't been able to do anything else. But the ones who were the most extraordinary in their abilities in HR had two sort of capacities. One of them was that they had tremendous, true operational experience. So they weren't just a professional in HR. They knew how the business goes. And the second one was that they were human in their approach. Problem with a lot of HR is they end up getting either just overwhelmed with the paperwork or the processes, and they're not very strategic in their application of HR. So I have memories of some of HR partners who were absolutely brilliant because they really got the business side of things. And then
so they had a line role before they did HR, like a consultative HR role.
Well, actually, not one of them didn't, Michael, but he was really intent on getting the strategic components of the business. And so he was good. But then a lot of the times it was unfortunately just sort of the bottom of the barrel, the last thing on the agenda. And by the way, it's really interesting to look at how an executive committee's agenda is constructed. At some level, if you could just sort of capture those agenda settings, of course, and the minutes, if there are any, then it can tell you so much about the culture of the company.
You mean if it's all about the numbers and not about anything else?
Exactly. Well, I mean, so they have 9 points. Point number 1 is numbers. Point number 2 is human resources. Point number 3 might be sustainable development. Point number 4, down to number 9, digital, whatever that is. And of course, you spend 98% of the meeting on point number 1. Oh, listen, I'm very sorry we didn't have time to do it. But Andrew, next time, all right.
We'll carry forward those as there are 8 agenda points. Yeah, but you've probably done the the what's it called, that there's like Myers-Briggs and stuff like that, and there's the colours one. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, insights.
Is it the blue? Are you a blue or you're a red? Are you a yellow or a green? Yeah,
I'm a yellow, big yellow, and little red, or number 2 red.
That's interesting. So I'm very similar to that as well. So a number of my colleagues that I worked with were very red, or very blue.
Analytical.
So my CEO that I was working for there was blue, and then the CFO was red, marketing director was red, marketing directors, HR was green.
As usual.
I really thought I was red actually because I was in operations, but I was kind of like a bit orange, I suppose. A bit of a mix of yellow and red, depending what time of day it is.
Andrew, the thing that I think is interesting, I like the insights model perhaps more than the MBTI one because it seems Myers-Briggs a little bit more nitpicky. The end of the day, what I liked about it was the need to adapt your communication style. And some might say, well, no, I'm the boss. I get to say what I want. Well, communication is a two-way street. And if you're not taking into account the context, personal as well, and the personality of the person in front of you, well, you're just going to fog bomb them because that's the way it is. And well, that might last a while, but not very long. Because
it's how you keep employee engagement, how you hearts and minds.
That's it.
And if you think about, I mean, I did talk about this today. There's a great quote from one of my very good GE alumni, who now runs an energy company in Florida. And he talks about the CEO remit is literally capital allocation. Number 1. Number 2 is execution. And number 3 is talent development. And to my mind, in this whole reset of the whole world, people are obviously obviously capital is always going to be a play, but also the point 3 I think is incredibly important. And I think some of the stuff you talk about in your book is spot on. It's it's very, very, it's a very modern discussion about some very good examples about what people should be thinking about when they are going to be a leader of the future or they are a leader today. Because I think there's also some people that I think people should be researching around some of the people you've spoken to as part of the research. As I won't say icons, but also people that how they've embraced their leadership styles and become more less bureaucratic and more or authentic and more accessible.
Well, the thing is, it's easier to teach about a process and about a formula than it is to teach someone to be themselves. And so business schools in general, the engineering mindset, the way exams are run, it's all about sort of showing knowledge, skills.
It's knowledge retrieval and calculation.
Yeah. And it's measurable.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't measure ethics. You can't measure empathy. You can't measure authenticity or purpose. So it's really a very messy part of management of business. And business schools shy away from it because they're generally wonderfully intelligent people, professors, who've never run a business in their lives, but have read a lot about stuff, just like consultants. Consultants who have never actually done it. They're very smart. They may be articulating stuff, do great decks, but they actually haven't done the shit.
Yeah, but just think about the PowerPoint decks, how good they are.
They're very good. one through 200.
I was in Prague actually a couple of years ago with a very, very interesting, very, very funky company in the prop tech space, and they ran a competition actually with BCG in the Prague office, and I went with Max, the CEO, to the final presentations, and the quality of the output. I mean, they've been given zero time to put it together, but the analytical nature, the quality of the output was absolutely astounding, and the professionalism of the people. But then it's that thing, as we've probably observed, is that it's nothing like being operational and being in a business where you have to do what you have to do, and when you're in that line function, it's amazing what you realize after you've been in there, what you learned and what you did, what you were picking up, what you're absorbing.
And the trick, of course,
the thing I find
is you need to be able to be comfortable with the numbers, the P&L, the analytics. And you need to be able to go into this messy stuff, emotions and personality, and that's a very uncomfortable place. So people like to take refuge in numbers, measurable. That's what we do. I can just isolate that. That's professional. That's what we're here for, Dan. That's what the paycheck's all about. And it's a kind of an easy argument.
And you've experienced that, I think you mentioned with even your line manager about that segregation, about there's like a clear segregation between both those worlds.
And there was some stuff that didn't get published that I wrote, but my editor said that's a little bit too brutal, but it also was the truth.
Maybe it's going to go in edition 2.
Indeed. Well, I had to cut something like 25,000 words as well. So I have two chapters worth of other stuff but I even have 2 other books I'm thinking about. So I'm not at a lack for things to write about.
Well, it sounds like you've got some good materials to come up in the future then.
I'm sort of figuring out the signs that are going to help me decide which path I'm going to go down next. I mean,
you could
both of them.
You could have you lead, and then you lead TOO.
Yes, right. Hashtag.
Well, no, we're getting a bit close to that little debacle. We don't want to talk about that in this episode. So in terms of your personal journey, I mean, you talked about some of the stuff that you're working on now, and obviously, I know you kind of mix it up with speaking and writing, and I presume you're doing some kind of advisory and supporting different businesses. I suppose it's something I've talked about with a number of guests is this concept of peaks and valleys. So I mean, I know that in obviously some of your personal story that's actually in this latest book, you talk about some different experiences. What would you be able to share today about some of your peaks and valleys that you think would be valuable for the audience?
Well, maybe to start with, white male, and in that, it's not necessarily an insult, but as white male, I'm definitely privileged and have probably had some luck given to me, not through merit. So that is a first point. And maybe I could talk about the story of when I arrived in America. I was expatriated from Paris to New York to take a line job. And so I arrived in America as an expatriate with a US passport, which is kind of a peculiar thing for anyone who understands how all this works. And so I was blithely thinking that I was just going to slide in as an American on the team. They didn't think my accent was fully American. You, of course, understand that it is, but in America, it sounds like I'm actually less American than most of the people. And the fact is, I came from Paris. Therefore, I was part of HQ.
Right.
HQ is not well regarded by most subsidiaries. There's always like, oh my God, eye rolling, hand twisting. Oh my God, fucking, what do they want? They're going to piss us off. They're going to, hassle us.
Corporate seagull.
Exactly. So, so the thing was that I thought that I was okay, but I wasn't. And similar thing happened from a different angle when I went to Canada. I was made head of the Canadian division, and I arrived, and so I thought there I was. Well, Canada. I mean, gosh, let's say
That's practically British again. You're practically British.
Well, exactly. So I'm half English. Sorry, half American, half French, and half English, basically, right? So in Quebec.
Sorry, just a second. You're half English, half American, and half French.
Yeah.
I think that's more than 100%, that is.
Well, I told you I'm really good with numbers, didn't I?
It's that excellent training from L'Oreal.
That's it. Oh, my stepmom always used to say that I am a 75 milliliter bottle of wine trying to fit in 125 into it, CL. So I arrived in Canada.
In Quebec.
I'm in Quebec, and I'm thinking, well, my Franco-American English credentials should stand me well in Quebec. And I speak the languages. I know the North American culture. I know the history. I know the Queen. I can even tell you the national anthem, and so on and so forth. And well, little did I know that they didn't really like any of them, because they're all pretty arrogant as far as the Canadians are concerned, who are just a wonderfully down-to-earth group of people. So I came again with I was perceived differently than the one I thought I was, because I just thought I was a cool guy, right? I just, I thought I was
just like smooth it in.
That's it.
Whoosh.
And yeah, so the point is you need to really lean in with that empathy to understand what and how you're being perceived. And it's not just because I think I'm cool that I'll be ultimately perceived as such.
I thought you were going to say. I mean, when you were talking about that, you see, it made me think about my Monty Python, heritage here with, either being a Mountie or being a lumberjack. You see, so maybe it was
I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay.
This is the first time you're hearing on Monty Python singing on the G&T sessions.
Take that one up.
And if Minter drinks any more gin and tonic, we'll be having a whole episode.
It'll be a slurring session.
No, that's interesting. So it's a bit like what you're saying is that part of your experience is about you have a perception of how you are going to land in that. You're going to parachute in, and then you kind of have this kind of I suppose this kind of Groundhog Day, this reality check or this wake up call about how it actually lands in reality with the people the environment you land into.
And to take this to today, the issue is that I am arriving into any conversation as a white male. And so I might have certain opinions that could be justifiable, but they are expressed out of my mouth. And that comes with a regard, perception. And so as much as I always want to be me, you do need to be respectful. But it's finding that balance between having a backbone, having the courage to say what you want to say, and having the empathy to understand how it's going to be received.
Yeah.
And I think that is the critical.
There's a perception and a sensitivity there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. So you don't want to just kowtow to whatever they want, because then who are you? Then you are nobody. So you need to have the courage of conviction, understand what you stand for, and go for it, yet have an understanding that there's a receptor. When you're communicating, it's a two-way thing. So
it's like being a wallflower, but then actually being able to be a lion as well.
Yep, maybe the Lion and the Tin Man.
I haven't got my red shoes on tonight, sorry.
Well.
So thanks for sharing that. So in terms of, I mean, on the tea side, one of the things that I would really recommend people to read the book about is because you, in the first part of your book, you actually talk a lot about quite a few interesting stories, some well known, some not so well known, about what you call the GAFAM. I thought the GAFAM. I thought so my analogy for these boys is called the AGFA boys. Obviously,
you're more imagery.
Well, yeah, AGFA, camera. But also, which is obviously, as Scott Galloway. Quick shout out to Scott Galloway, New York Stern professor, Prof G, calls the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Obviously, the other version I got was Fang, obviously because you forgot about Netflix. But GAFAM, for anybody that's trying to understand this on saying what is Andrew talking about, is Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. I thought you've introduced Microsoft now. I thought that was an interesting little twist on the tech titans. How come you've introduced Microsoft again? I thought they were dead.
Yeah, no, I don't think they're so dead, but there's still a force to be reckoned with. PC still exists. I'm still using Word. I hate PowerPoint, and they're also led by an extraordinary individual. And that, for me, I mean, outside of the fact that they are still quite Titanesque in terms of size, and they're not going away tomorrow, they have created another type of persona in my mind, which is really interesting. And, if I had to wish to meet one of the current 5 CEOs, Satya Nadella is definitely the one that I would most want to meet. I mean, I'd be interested to talk to any of them, of course, but the one I'd really like to get to know is Nadella.
Yeah, and I think this is analogous to a session I had the other week where the one-liner was quite an interesting one for Microsoft. It's from evil empire to cool kid.
Cooler kid. I mean, because it's a big company, and nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah, but I think what he has done is, if you think back to Michael Hammer, remember Michael Hammer from the 90s? Good old Michael Hammer, God rest his soul. The phrase "re-engineering the corporation." Remember that kind of a legendary book that he put out. That's what Satya's done. He's re-engineered Microsoft, which is an amazing feat.
Well, I would like to use another word based on or bouncing off that. I think he's rehumanized it.
Yeah. I mean, when I mean re-engineer, he's the culture. Yeah,
totally.
And the culture and the people. He's re-engineered the people process, the people way, the people values, the ways of operating.
And the funny thing about this sort of a topic, Andrew, is that it's an enormous organization. And just like any enormous organization, there are loads of imperfections and inconsistencies. And it's something that's really interesting. It's this idea of purpose in companies. I talk a lot about it. And again, you need to layer in governance and your ownership structure. If we talk about topics like purpose, if you're a privately held company, 100% owned by the founder, and you write your own governance model, you can kind of do whatever you want. and you lead by example. You are the brand as the owner, and that you hopefully hire the right people, and then things will progress. But when you're talking about an enormous company that is publicly traded, run by a very interesting, very smart CEO, and you have 100,000 or several 100,000 employees, you're inevitably, it's not all a perfect example, and you have very strong limitations as to what you're actually able to do in that re-engineering that you're talking about. Because you got to do it, still having quarterly numbers come in.
I mean, it also depends if the founder is still in the business. Because it's that thing about as you talk about, and I've witnessed it myself, is that, when I was at SAP in the 90s, and, the original founders were still in the business, Hasso and all the rest of the guys. I mean, it was crazy, but it was amazingly good fun being there, because their personalities imprinted themselves on the culture of the organization. But obviously that changed over time as the founders started to leave, and some of them are still around, but they're more non-exec, etc. And then Hasso left, and then he saw that he tried to put new leadership in, and then he actually had to come back to try and help to do what, I'm not saying what Satya did, but try to re-galvanize the human dimension of SAP. It was like a turnaround.
Well, whether it's human or not, I mean, that is not an uncommon story, because the whole issue of transmission is so difficult. And you can just take a look at the old Apple story as to how that went around, and or the Schultz at Starbucks. When you have this sort of a missionary leader, founder or proxy founder in the case of Schultz, of the company, it makes decision-making so much easier. On top of the fact that you have a large ownership and therefore you have skin in the game, you are the brand, and you're making decisions based on, of course, analytics and smartness, but also gut and blood. And as much as any of these new CEOs are, of course, are working hard, and it's not because they have lack of intention or hard work, but they are dissociated from that sort of DNA of the entrepreneur, the founder.
They don't have the man and boy kind of experience, supposedly. Usually.
Yeah, I mean, that's that whole challenge, and it's part of the journey. And so if you are too strong a character, you own too much, then having somebody who's going to be able to take over, that's a real challenge. Then, of course, in the case of Tim Cook, which is a really, I think, interesting case in point, because they are very different personalities between Jobs and Cook. Yet somehow I feel like Jobs kind of impregnated enough people within the organization with Cook and around him to allow for that mission to be carried on. And, who knows how long it's going to last. But they've done a remarkable job of moving away from the Jobs era of style of management to a Tim Cook, who at some level could hardly be more different.
Yeah, I mean, my perception with Apple is that, it was very iconic, but obviously it wasn't, probably from a leadership point of view, it wasn't a case study in best practice. Yeah,
no,
there was some.
God no.
There was definitely some peaks and valleys there, or some stuff behind the curtain, where you do feel that at least Tim is more inclusive, and where he brings, if you think about the Apple events now, which have obviously we've all probably watched them over the last decade. He brings in the team. He brings in the team of the team. The diversity of people that are now on the Apple event is it's not just all about Steve, as it was used to be about Steve and the top team. It's now Tim and the top team, and then the DRs of the top team as well. The specialists and the geniuses that are working in Apple, which makes it a lot more. You feel like it's more of a family. It's more of a team effort. It's more of a one team effort. I don't know if you feel that, but that's the vibe I get.
Well, my wife worked for Apple, so she has good knowledge of the insides of it. And I can't help but think that at that size of the organization, there are inevitably lots of problems. And so someone who's working at Apple listening to this can say, oh, well, yeah, that's just a bunch of crap. It's not the way that is, for me anyway. But ultimately, what's happened is we've created this abstract idea of what is Apple? What does it stand for? And whether it's the imprint of the 1984 ad or the conversation that Jobs had with Scully, do you want to sell sugary water or do you want to change the world? Let me think about that one for a second. And somehow that sort of mode, that story, we're all familiar with. I mean, and as written by the remarkable Walter Isaacson, the biography of Steve Jobs, to prolong it, part of the storytelling. So Cook is smart enough to keep that feeling going somehow, yet imprinting his own thing, because you have to do it with governance models because it's a publicly traded company now and it's big size and he has big responsibilities and huge trusts and funds are invested in him. And so you can't just do whatever he wants, a la Jobs.
Yeah, it's a bit like moving from being a teenager to being an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking probably more like an irascible 20-year-old, moved away from being a teenager. The zits are gone. I can do smart stuff. I've got good grades at university. And now I've got to go into the real world. Ooh la la.
Well, Tim Cook, if you're listening to this episode, I'd love to get you on the show to explain if that's a fair representation of the evolution of Apple. There you go, from teenager to young adult with a mortgage.
Another GAFM CEO.
Yes, exactly. So, by the way, I've got a bone to pick with you. Actually, there's actually a vicious rumor that you are a Liverpool Football Club fan.
Strike me down. I can't believe that rumor's gotten out.
I tell you, I don't know how we found it out, but actually, my eldest son, who's 17, will love you forever and hug you a lot because he's a big Liverpool fan as well.
Excellent. Let me tell you how I became a Liverpool fan. And because I followed two professional sports teams all my life. I'm a rugby man. So in general, you would have thought that this should have been in rugby. But this happened for a very specific reason. I arrived at my prep school in Dorset. So I just turned 8 years old. And it was a lovely place called the Old Malthouse. And the new boys were congregating for tea. Of course, accompanied by the head nurse and the headmaster. And so there we were sitting totally gormlessly, like when you go to a dance and you don't know how to speak to the girls. So I finally get up the courage to go to one chap and I say, "Hi, my name's Mentor. What's yours?" And he said, Andy. My name's Andy. Oh, great. I didn't have a second question. So
you ran out of steam straight away.
I ran out of steam already. Question number 2. Oh, who do you support? I support Liverpool Football Club. Really? Can I support them? I asked. And that is why I'm a Liverpool fan. 48 years on.
Wow.
And Andy's no longer Andy, he's Charlie. But that doesn't help. And because he changed his name. And he doesn't support Liverpool anymore. But here I am, hanging on. Of course, been a good year.
Who was it? Yeah, you've been lucky so far.
Oh la la.
Mon Dieu. So who was the manager when you were supporting them at the beginning then? Who was it?
Oh my golly gosh.
Was it Shankly? Was it Shankly?
I guess it was Shankly, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Heyday.
Toshak and
yeah, Kevin Keegan and all that stuff.
Yeah, that stuff, yeah.
Wow. Well, so my youngest son, who's 15, he's James. He's a Chelsea fan.
So is my son.
Oh, really? Okay. And I'm supposed to be a Man City fan, you see. So.
Well, there you go. Wow.
But then we all have our cross to bear.
We do.
So it's going to be. So I know that Man United are doing far too well in the league this year. So we're going to have to nobble them. We have to nobble them to get back on top. So one of the things I was going to say was, what are you most excited about these days? Then, what would you say you are most excited about, and that makes you bound and get, what we're in a new year, new decade. What are you excited about?
Well, I suppose I'm definitely excited by this idea of trying to upend leadership and bring people onto a more fulfilling life as leaders. Finding the route, giving the permission to do that, and
that's a good mission. That's a good mission. I like that. It's a good mission.
And I do it in very small ways when I can. Andrew, I've been doing a thing called an empathy circle, which is a structured dialogue, and I usually have 3 to 4 other individuals with me. We spend 2 hours together. And in the process, and usually I select them very carefully, they're typically CEOs doing big things, very important, rushed, but I make sure that they carve out 2 hours. And one of the things that I like to see happen is appreciating the ability to listen yet again, without thinking that I have to know all the answers, and bringing in the opportunity to be empathic with other people and connect in deeper ways. And I think that, especially in today's tumultuous times, I see a lot of people suffering from a lack of energy, suffering from a lack of direction, North Star, and suffering generally. But I also think we're going to be suffering from an economic standpoint. So as the real consequences of the pandemic come to roost in due course. And so I think we're going to need to consider this a marathon. And if you think of this as just as a performance marathon, we're going to burn out very quickly. So to the extent that you're going to have to work long hours, 12 hours, whatever a day, might as well think of them as part of your life, might as well be you throughout all of the day. And that's a conviction I feel is getting more and more pressing, the urgency, the importance of being like that. Because if you're going to work hard, lean into why you're working hard and find something that's more meaningful. And that needs to start with the boss, woman or man, whoever's doing it, because if they haven't done that work on understanding who they are, who they want to be, and why they're working where they are, it becomes a pretty academic exercise for the rest, and therefore can't be real or useful.
Yeah, it's like you're living a lie.
Yeah, and I think basically, of course, that's a term, a lie, but in general, it's a mirage.
Yeah. Okay, maybe lie's a bit too kind of.
Well, but I mean, you're right. You're right. It's just that's the more provocative. We were talking about like my ability to qualify. It's this idea of a mask, and today we're all wearing masks. We still will, even if you think you know yourself 100%, you still have masks. They still have total necessity and permission not to reveal 100% of who you are. So rather than be a sort of dictator or I don't know, a tyrannical idea of always having to be 100% who you are, it's just really about moving people towards a more complete version of themselves, especially at work, and making sure it's aligned, their personal and professional ambitions with their full North Star.
So it's a bit like there's a few different, when you said about the man behind the mask, yeah. So I was thinking about the French. What was it? The French. The movie with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Need one more clue. I need one more clue.
The one that was about Louis. Was it Louis XIV, something like that?
And Leonardo DiCaprio, my son is the go-to for all film references, and plus, since we're half French, he'll definitely know.
Sorry, it's the man in the iron mask.
The man in the iron mask.
Yeah. It was Louis the 15th.
Louis the XV, yeah, kind of the forgotten king.
The secret twin.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also thinking about the more recent person is Tyson Fury, the man behind the mask.
Well, we all have masks, and that's a One of the things I'm interested in, I have a number of topics that really get me going. One of them is transparency.
Yeah.
And this idea of the tyranny of transparency that sometimes is promoted out there. And of course, I'm interested in trust, but I'm also interested in longevity, at least to the extent that thinking that radical transparency, 100% showing yourself is the route, I think is a very risky route and probably on balance, not desirable. So on the other hand, I'm not militating for opacity and lying and all this other thing. So it's just about finding that nice balance. And transparency is an interesting topic. And I'm doing a session with a bunch of other really smart minds talking about it. And it turns out that, of course, culturally it can be different, but it's another one of these, we have to be able to push back on certain topics. Just because it sounds right doesn't mean that it is right. And we have to move away from some ideal principles to being pragmatic. So, for example, it's not only about purpose, it's about purpose and profit and finding that balance.
Oh, it's about the genius of the and.
Exactly. It's about analytics, numbers, and messy humanity.
It's the qual and the quant.
That is. Yeah, exactly. The yin and the yang, the
Laurel and the Hardy.
That's
the cannonball. Yeah. No.
And I write a lot about the paradoxes of our lives. And I think it's really important that you are accepting of that and not be too dogmatic about one side or the other. It's about learning to manage both. There's that session, someone said, the smart person is able to balance two things in the mind at the same time. And I think that is a true sign of a good leader.
Yeah. And be empathetic and be authentic.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I was mentioning before, empathetic and courageous.
Mm.
It sounds like they're a counterpoint, but I don't believe that they are. Because
the perception sometimes is that if people show emotion, then they are being weak.
Mm.
When actually it's a strength.
I agree.
Mm. So I suppose to finish off today's session, I mean, I suppose wrap it up in I suppose the question would be around, your takeaways, your pearls of wisdom. What would be, and I know your book is packed with guidance for people. If you were thinking about some things for people to think about and to do more work on themselves, or to do more work on looking at things they should be improving on, what would be those in your journey and the things you've researched and you've written about? What would be those top things that spring to mind?
So this is contextual to where we are today. So there are three things. One is really start to listen to your own energy. Don't just say everything's okay. Don't just pretend like, oh, well, I'm a leader. I got this title that I can do it. Figure out where your energies are, and that's going to help you connect better into other people. Second idea is the quality of silence. We tend to fill our times with I certainly do. I'm a list of things to do kind of thing, always wanting to go on the go. And I have intentionally looked at ways of integrating silence into my day. And as a third one, I think we need to be in a constant learning mode, but we need to be conscious that we can't just learn, and B, need to learn what we need to learn, not necessarily just what we want to learn. So that means stopping and thinking a little bit about what your capacities are, where do you want to go, who do you want to be, and what do you need to learn in order to accomplish it. Because right now, there's so many things we can learn. The information is just ridiculous out there. The number of tabs that you can have open on your browser, or the number of books that you have to read, or the size of your list of things to do is generally overwhelming.
It's like a tsunami.
It is. And you can just tell by the way people are communicating or are not communicating, for that matter, or the number of times that we have notifications that are buzzing and bizzing, and too many people are being victims of these things rather than take it strategically. So my point on learning is we need to learn in constant mode. We're always going to have to improve because shit's going to change all the time. But also take stock and move away just from going for what's easy because you want to do it to maybe what you need to learn.
Yeah, which is a bit like doing that thing on yourself and doing that inventory and saying, what are your superpowers? How do you do more of that? But also, how do you build out your superpowers in towards your destination? And it's interesting because people talk about that they think there's like a destination of what they want to be, but that's why I think why the continuous piece at the end you just said there is so relevant, because everybody's, whether you're a billionaire or you're a CEO of a big, PLC or a global company, from some of the people I've had on the show, and some of the ones, and some, one of the guys is actually in your book, Run and Done.
Lovely man.
It's amazing, man. Yeah, and he's very authentic. We had a really good conversation, and he talked about some of his peaks and valleys and his struggles with things, being a leader in a very big company. And it's admirable that people can be accessible and be open like that. So and actually say that they're still work in progress.
Yeah.
So Mr. Dial, Mr. Minter Dial,
Mr. Turner,
Lord Dial. Thank you very much for coming on today's show. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you.
Likewise. And
we had some silent moments as well, which was good for point 2.
Absolutely.
So people who want to know more about, your Minter Dial world and what you do or how you do it, the kind of the works that you're putting out, and can continuously learn from your insights, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
On a general level, my eponymous website, minterdial.com, is sort of my hub. That's where you can find about my books, my film that I did, The Lost Ring Home.
Which is about your grandfather.
That's right. Second World War story about this ridiculous ring. And
Lieutenant Minter Dial.
That's right. Exactly right. And otherwise I have my newsletter. I have my weekly podcast, and and I tweet a little bit at MDIAL.
M-Dial.
That's the one.
Who are you going to dial? Minter.
Dial M for.
It's not dial M for murder. It's dial M for Minter this time.
That's the one.
Okay, Mr. Dial, Mr. Minter Dial, speaker, author, all-round good egg. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, it's been a pleasure.
And in honor of your storytelling and your books, you see, I have a storytelling image behind me.
Love it.
Yeah, bit of a funky artistic. You see,
I like it
on a January evening. So thank you for your time, and let's catch up soon. That was.
You betcha. You stay well. Gin and tonic it shall be.
Yeah, I feel hard done to now because I've not had a gin and tonic all this time. You see, I need to hit the bar if I can find one, but there's no bars open at the moment, so that's a bit difficult.
True.
Anyway, that was Minter Dial. Thank you very much, Minter, and that was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. Speak to you soon. Take care.